And now we go into the power of symbolization with regard to naming and action. This is the 8th power. In this place, we're going to look at action and liberation. Action equals liberation. Liberation equals freedom of expression, especially self-expression. Self-expression is the truest form of liberation, and that is how we know we are free. If we can express ourselves. If we can't express ourselves, there's a problem, right? So it's a measure of freedom, a really powerful measure of freedom through all our symbols, right? All our symbols, our words, our art. Yes, okay, so I wanted to begin my focus, and I began my focus with Terra Nova, with talking about some of the great activists, because I considered myself to be in the lineage of these activists, because I'm a person who has always been a social activist, and I've always been interested in social change, and always looking at the areas, and interested in also in nonviolent social change. That's always been very important to me too. That's what I grew up in, as a lot of us did, in the 60s and the 70s and so on, and looking at how this nonviolent change comes about. So I go back a lot to these 4 activists. Martin Luther King is one of them. Gandhi is another one. Tolstoy, and then William Penn, because those 4 were actually in the lineage going the other direction, from William Penn to Tolstoy to Gandhi to Martin Luther King. That's a lineage. So in a sense, I consider myself to be in that lineage. Okay, what is that lineage? It's a lineage of self-expression. It's a lineage of self-liberation, and which leads into liberation for the people. Wind Sister would really exemplify this place. Wind Sister in the tarot cards. Wind Sister as the priestess of the power of truth. And that brings up our daily spiritual practice, which is our practice for this month, which is affirm your truth through action. That's our spiritual practice. Affirm your truth through action. Practice being that which you believe in. And so what I try to do is I try to practice being love and peace in my everyday life. And then what happens when you live the truth of your soul? That's the question. What begins to happen when you start living your action moment by moment by moment? So I put together the class on symbolization and action, on Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Tolstoy, and William Penn, basically. Then I have a dream. First of all, I have to tell you, when I was putting together the class, I'm typing it on my computer, of course, right? Type the class on the computer. And right next to the computer, as I was typing the class, I had a vase of white poppies. Okay, so that was my setup. And those poppies, someone gave them to me. They were out of somebody's garden. Beautiful white poppies. Okay, so fine. So this is where I was. So I go to sleep. Now I go to sleep, and I have a dream. So the dream was I'm working on the class for Terra Nova, and I dreamed I had forgotten to include in the lineage Riane Eisler. That was the dream. And I needed to wake up, get up now, and write her in.
How do you spell her name?
Riane Eisler, Eisler, Riane Eisler. So still inside the dream. Now I'm still inside the dream. So still inside the dream, I get up and I write Riane into the lesson. And as I am typing her name, the white poppies start to dump seeds into the keyboard. And so the keyboard is starting to fill up with white poppy seeds, right? So I think, oh no, I gotta vacuum these things out of the keyboard, and then as soon as I finish talking about the chalice and the blade, which is her book, key critical book, then I'm going to vacuum all this stuff out of the keyboard. And then I wake up. That's all in my dream. Okay, so I wake up and I'm like, OMG, we're in symbols, we're talking about symbology, and this could not have been more clear. The keyboard was getting seeded with the white poppies as I was typing about the chalice and the blade, which is Riane Eisler's work. So then, after I was awake and I started to put Riane into the class, I did an internet search for the white poppy. Oh, what's the symbolism of the white poppy, which I had never thought about before. And guess what? The white poppy is the symbol of peace, which I thought was rather interesting. Because talk about how these synchronicities come together, and then the dreams and the guidance. Where are we getting all this guidance? So let's cut to Riane and her contribution. So the Chalice and the Blade, published in, I'm going to tell you when it was published. So it appears 1987. So it appears in 1987. So she was working on this material during the decade of the 80s and really starting to make some moves in what we would call 87, women's spirituality. And she's local, by the way, or was. I don't know if she still lives here, but she was living in Pacific Grove at the time. By the way, do you know that the first 500 books that came out in women's spirituality, remember that whole movement didn't even start till the tail end of the 70s, like the 1970, there were some seeds. Before that, the first 500 books that came out on women's spirituality came from the San Francisco Bay Area. This place was the seed of women's spirituality and where it was seeded for the whole world. And people in other parts of the world called this place, they named it the San Francisco School. And you wouldn't even have known that unless you were in contact with people in other parts of the world who were watching the San Francisco School and waiting to see what was going to happen. Well, FYI, we are still in the San Francisco School. We are part of the evolution of the San Francisco School, which is still in motion right here as we sit here right now. So, and the Chalice and the Blade was one of those books that began to seed the movement of consciousness. So the chalice is the feminine, right? And it's the receiver. That it's that which is the receiver, the divine receiver. The blade is the masculine. So what Riane is started to posit and to move toward is a partnership between the masculine and the feminine that was going to start to move our world. Okay, and she talked about a lot of different things, and one of the things that she was talking about, as well as many other people were talking about, is one of the things that we absolutely have to deal with is population as a major global problem. And how do we deal with population? Well, the traditional means of dealing with population would be disease, hunger, and war. These are three convenient ways to get rid of excess humans on the planet. Her solution, and a lot of other people's solution as well, is reproductive freedom for women and equality. In order to have that, you have to have equality for all, because you also have to change the circumstances women live under, and also at the same time introduce reproductive freedom, and then everything starts to come into a balance. It's complicated, though. It's actually a very complicated equation, and I will throw in right now that one of the things that I learned in Central America, because I was a big proponent of and I am still, zero population growth. Just replace yourself. Remember that term, zero population growth? We don't use it anymore, but but it's really strong. Well, okay, when you're in a place like Central America, when you're in El Salvador, where you've got a very high infant mortality rate, and a child, a very high malnutrition rate, and so on, there's a good chance that those children are going to die. So you need to have more children to make sure that some of them live, and maybe some of them will be around to take care of you in old age. So I just want to throw that in. It's not as straightforward as it seems, but one of the key areas we need to work on. I'm not talking about Riane right now. She wasn't talking about those things, but I'm just saying it's a little complicated, but reproductive freedom being a key. So, all right. Okay, so according to, Riane and then a lot of other people, to give, quote, women's issues top priority would actually mean the end of the present system. Everything, it would be that big that everything would shift and everything would change. And the present system, okay, now she was writing this in the 80s, but today is January 20th, 2018, the day of the International Women's March, right? So these issues are still alive and well and continuing. So it's still up. It's still up. The present system that we live in is what Riane calls the dominator model. And to empower women completely, we would need to move into a collaborative model, which she calls the partnership model. This is no less than a paradigm shift. Of course, this would be a paradigm shift. And women's rights would become human rights, which right now, even still, is not the case. Women's rights are not necessarily considered to be human rights. There's a difference between women's rights and human rights. Okay, so it's really critical. The women's movement, and I was talking about social change, and I'm going to go back to this, but Martin Luther King and Gandhi. But we need to look at what this has to do with women's lives and women's rights, and what our world is about regarding the feminine. Okay, so I just want to take a shift back before going forward into Riane Eisler, and I want to talk about the Tree of Life for just a moment, because we're studying the Tree of Life. So we're looking at how things get placed on the Tree of Life. So at the top of the Tree of Life, we have the cosmological triangle, I call it, the supernal triangle. It's composed of spheres 1, 2, and 3. So 1 is the individual, but it's also the cosmos. It's the individual with the cosmos, the individual containing the cosmos, and then born in onto the individual level. Right after that, we have the male and the female. It differentiates into male and female and holds all three of those in equal status. They all emerge and they're in equal status. This is a paradigm shift. It's a cosmological paradigm shift to look at all of those at once as the same, as equal, as powerful. The divine cosmos, the divine masculine, the divine feminine, and all of these three spheres would have to be in place equally and all at one time in order to create a culture of respect, of honor, of caretaking, of liberty, of freedom of expression, of individuation, of creativity, of synergy, and population balance. All of it. It has to receive equal respect. Honoring the sacred feminine. That is the piece that has been missing in our culture. And then, of course, again, putting reproductive issues in women's hands. To honor the cosmos as alive, and here we take another step, to honor the cosmos as alive, as living being, creates a huge basis for the paradigm shift. And that is what begins to move us from industrial mind or industrial consciousness into synergistic mind or synergistic consciousness, because it's a different set of values when we start to look at things as alive and as something that we would care for, because caring is a feminine value, that we would receive, we would understand, and we would caretake. So if we want to rework our individual and collective values, we need to redefine the way we understand our universe. That's the bottom line. We need to redefine it as a love-based universe rather than a fear-based universe. A living, loving cosmos striving to balance itself while evolving. Okay, and cataclysm is inherent in this balancing process. And it will always be inherent in a balancing process. It's one of the spheres. It's one of the things that does exist. And sometimes when we find ourselves inside cataclysm, conflict, natural disasters, what have you, we have to come to a place within ourselves where we say, wait a minute, love is a choice. So part of this is about choosing to be inside that consciousness, the consciousness of loving, of relationship, and feeling those energies. So what we see in the outer world is what we look with. So what we need to do if we want to change and move into a caretaking world, a different kind of culture of respect, honor, caretaking, and so on, that what we need to do is we need to change what we look with. So we do that by changing our personal values, right? That's how we change what we look with. We change our personal values, and on that basis, we change the story that is carved on our soul, that we carve on our soul. So this moves us to another level. And now returning back to, that's about the tree of life. And now returning back to Riane Eisler. So she says, okay, we still live in a primarily male-dominated system which stays intact by the stories told. This is a system which values rank ordering and equates might with right. And in this place, violence and there's violence and the strong man rule. That's the dominant feeling. This is held in place through story. It's held in place by storytelling. That's the only thing that really holds it in place. And the story is upheld through, quote, holy or, quote, officially sanctioned scriptures, such as the Bible, the Quran, the Mein Kampf, quotations from Chairman Mao. This is Riane Eisler talking here, because we're on edgy ground, but this is what upholds the story. These books, for example, they're sacred, holy, or set apart as being the answer. They hold, quote, the answers, and the ultimate truth. Riane talks about the human psyche as having a built-in need for a system of stories and symbols that, quote, reveal to us the order of the universe and tell us what our place within the universe is. That's what gives us a sense of meaning and purpose. So then the question is, okay, fine. So what kinds of symbols and myths might guide us into a different kind of future? So Riane says, here's what this is about. Quote, basically, the central human task becomes how to organize society to promote the survival of our species and the development of our unique potential. So she's looking at our species. How can we protect our species and allow it to develop and thrive, basically using a new set of stories, some kind of new set of stories. We need new stories, right? A lot of people are saying this, but I'm particularly focusing on Riane because I think her contribution was very significant from a philosophical point of view. Okay, so then she starts looking at Ilya Prigogine, Niles Eldridge, Erwin Laszlo, Jonas Salk, Fritjof Capra, some scientists and philosophers of science, and she starts looking for some answers in that realm. She starts looking for science that shows that humans have the ability to act consciously and exercise foresight to choose their own evolutionary path. Like, we actually have that ability within us to choose our own path. We have the power to image something, symbolize it, and thereby to create a better world. So we could symbolize, for example, as she was saying, global partnership. A global partnership that is integrally related to a fundamental re-examination and transformation of women's and men's roles on this planet. Very basic, new images of male roles and female roles. That's what is necessary to come up with. So what are the keys? Okay, number one key, we need to define feminine. Okay, so what does that mean? Like, what's that about? Well, interconnectedness, relationship, love is the key. And then moving toward number two would be to bridge the gap between science and spirituality. So redefine the feminine, or define the feminine in new ways and ways with power. So inner relationship, which would be a feminine, part of the feminine constellation, would be held in high regard, like very high regard, that things are interrelated. Okay, and then we need to bridge the gap between science and spirituality. And then thirdly, we need to make conflict productive rather than destructive. So that if you've got some people or groups or whatever that are in conflict, we would look at the conflict and we say, oh, here's an opportunity to make things better here. Not to hold our positions, right, in the conflict. So we need to redefine conflict and redefine power. So instead of defining power as power over, which is, the traditional way that we have defined power, that we actually define power as linking. When we link together, we're stronger. Like, let's hold hands and be powerful. So power becomes linking, and we, in addition, can begin to reimagine and re-image the powers of the universe. And when we link power, we start to move into a new kind of understanding of what could be called the Great Round. And that's
Great.
The Great Round. And that's like the great round of being, where everybody has contributions that they make, and we could call this synergy if we want to use our contemporary language. So this requires new human values, new social arrangements, and instituting primarily a model of caring and making that valuable. That we care. So that means transcending the teachings of limitation and fear, which is the primary teachings that we traditionally have gotten in school and so on. So in school is a place where we can begin to change the values for little children. Okay, here's a place we're going to link together. We're not going to be in competition. How can we work together to build that ship? Whatever it is. We're going to make it together. We're going to... one of the examples that I've thought of a lot, and I remember thinking about this around the time Riane was writing, there was a Special Olympics in Washington State. And during this Special Olympics, so the Special Olympics is people who, have particular issues, like maybe they're in a wheelchair or something, so it's whatever could be going on. But here's going to be an Olympics race, right? So what they do is they start the race, like go, and here's a line of people, and they go, and they get up to the ribbon, and the idea is you're supposed to run through the ribbon, and whoever, or whatever, with your wheelchair, whatever, and whoever does that wins, right? That's how we do it. You got a gold medal, you got a silver medal, you got a bronze medal. That's how we do it. Okay, so what happened in this particular race, and this reminds me of linking, is that they take off, they get there, and the first person who got up to the ribbon didn't go through it, just stayed in place, running, moving, whatever. And here comes the second person up, didn't go through it either. This was spontaneous. Third person, they link arms. They wait till every last person makes it to that ribbon, and they all went through together. That's power. That's a different form of power. Everybody wins. It's a win-win all around. Extreme empowerment. And I think that's the kind of thing that Riane would have been talking about. Let's link. And that's a literal linking. But in order to do that, it requires new human values, And so how are we going to do this? How are we going to move into this? And if we do, it's going to impact population, overpopulation. It's going to impact the environment. It's going to impact energy issues. It's going to impact health problems all the way across the board. What we have to do, though, is move from a dominator model into a partnership model, a linking model, a partnership world. And in this partnership world, we and our children and grandchildren and so on will again know eventually, this is Riane, what it means to live free of the fear of war. Because when we start moving into that kind of world, war is no longer... it doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't make sense. Okay, so Riane Eisler is part of the women's spirituality movement, and I'll remind you that Elizabeth Cady Stanton had said way back in the 1880s, nothing is going to change until we rewrite the Bible. I mean, she was completely on board with that. This women's movement has been going on for a really long time. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton did set out to do that, rewrite the Bible. She wrote the Women's Bible. And I myself was very involved in this movement because, I was at the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, which started out as the Center for Research on Women at Stanford. It was the first women's research institute. And these are the things we were talking about, first one in the country. And then the Women's Spirituality Department at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I was helping to create that, and I was still at Stanford then, but I was helping to create what were going to be some of the, how could this be? This is like new thinking, whole new kind of thinking. Where would this go? How would you put this together? And I was very involved myself in re-symbolizing birth, because I was working in birth for over a decade. And what I was doing and what I was working on was to try to turn a whole idea of birth, of giving birth, into part of women's power instead of women's weakness, women's curse. Because women have been cursed to birth and sorrow and pain, and sorrow. So I thought, well, 90% of women give birth. Let's turn that one over and see what we can do. Like, let's start, feeling the power and energy of giving birth. And, so I was really involved in that for many, many years with the Birth Center, and doing a lot of work in the country with that, and writing about it, and then with Priestess, the book Priestess, and helping to create this whole sense of what it would mean to elevate women to be in this place of partnership, with these feminine values being really strong, but also to be in partnership with men. And then I would say that now where we are is that this collaborator partnership model, we could call it the synergistic model or the synergistic mind. And, I basically outlined it in Visionary Cosmology, with the chart that shows industrial mind into synergistic mind. But this is, now we are, so this is 1987, 97, 2007, 2017, so we're all these years later. But what I want to say is Riane Eisler was absolutely central in seeding this material, and the idea that what we're talking about here is a paradigm shift. And so even with the basic tools that we already had from people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi. We needed to go to the next level. We needed to take women's lives into another dimension, or it was never going to be complete. It's not going to work unless we are really clear that we're bringing in women's values. Okay, women's rights, women's rights too are civil rights. Okay, so speaking of civil rights now, I want to cut to Martin Luther King Jr. So he was actually born Michael King in 1934. And his dad had traveled to, I don't have his birth date right. He was born in 1927? I forget, I'm sorry, I have that wrong. Okay, I have that wrong. But he was born Michael King. And in 1934, his dad, when he was just a little kid, so he was like maybe 6 years old or something, and his dad took a trip to Germany, and he learned about Martin Luther, who Martin Luther was the person, as you will remember, who nailed the 95 Theses on the church door, and then these were subjects of debate with the church. Okay, that he felt, he was a monk, and he felt, here are 95 places the church is going wrong. I'm part of the church, and I will debate any one of these. I am here, let's debate. Okay, so what happened was that the printing press had only recently been invented, and they did it. So in 1456, that's when the first Bible was printed on the printing press. But then after that, they didn't have a lot of stuff that might, quote, go viral. Everyone was into, like, okay, we've got this printing press, how are we going to use it? So Martin Luther puts up these 95 Theses on the church door, and the next thing was, it went viral. It was all over Europe, and he was blown away. It was the first time in history that anything had ever done that. It was the first time. The media. So the printing press, by the way, was invented about 1440, but didn't really take off until the 1456 with the first Bible. But then it was October 31st, 1517, when he nailed those theses up. So that was 500 years ago. 1517, and we just finished 2017, right? So it's 500 years ago. And this started the Reformation. And now October 31st is called Reformation Day, in case you didn't know about that, which I find rather interesting, that it is also Halloween. Okay, so anyway, Martin Luther, of course, he was brought in for heresy, of course, that's what always happens. And he was excommunicated. But the thing was, he was actually the first superstar that ever existed in history, really. He was a superstar because of the media, and he hit what the people wanted to hear. So he was excommunicated by the church, but then he just said, well, you know what? Really? Well, so I'm getting excommunicated by the church, am I? Well, guess what? I am excommunicating the church. So he had a bonfire and he burned church materials with a lot of people watching and the media watching, so it went all around. And everybody knew that Martin Luther had made this bonfire, and then I was wondering how much that influenced Gandhi, because Gandhi talked a lot about the bonfire scene around the world, because later what he was doing was burning British clothes in a bonfire.
His first was burning the passes on the train.
Oh, there you go.
Africa.
Burning, but you need the media to make it an event, right? So, and that's what So Martin Luther King's dad learned about Martin Luther, and he learned about the media, and he learned about how you could pull this off and how you could attract the people. So, and his name was Michael. Michael King, the dad, right? And Martin Luther King Jr., his name was Michael King Jr. So he goes back, and I think Martin Luther was, little Michael Jr., he was probably about 6. And so his dad gets back from Germany, from this trip to Germany, and he renames both of them. I'm Martin Luther King Sr., and you are Martin Luther King Jr. So, and we can change the world. Martin Luther, he did it, we can do it. So little Martin Luther King Jr. already grew up knowing all about the media, which I think is really interesting. His dad had, changed his name around the idea. Okay, so, yeah. So the message, we can do this thing. We can change what is. And now we're talking about civil rights. This is the civil rights movement. We can change things that seem to be fixed. Martin Luther did it. We can do it. So, okay. So then, here it is. By the way, Martin Luther King Jr. was born in 1929. Yeah, 29. That was the date, 29. So he came in with this, with a sense of personal efficacy, and also the media. Thus, he was the one who, when Rosa Parks didn't get up on the bus, that when Martin Luther King heard about that, helped to reorchestrate that event 2 weeks later with the event there. With the media there. With the media there, so that they could really make that event go. So operationalizing love and peace, if we're actually going to try to operationalize what that means, because Martin Luther King was certainly headed in that direction, if we're going to operationalize love and peace, we have to have 2 things. One is we have to affirm that we have the right to participate in creating with our world, that we have the right to do that. And then number 2, that we can create effective symbolization to transmit our message, which is something that Gandhi mastered beautifully. So Gandhi came before Martin Luther King, right? And in order to do this, in order to effectively participate and create change, this involves living in accordance with 4 affirmations. And I've talked about Rosa Parks a lot, being inside these 4 affirmations. The first one is, these are the 4 affirmations of the law of change. The first one is, the law of life is a law of freedom. The law of life is a law of freedom. Therefore, I am free. Because if we don't believe we're free, that's why I'm talking about self-liberation. If we don't believe we're free, we're never going to make a move. No matter what the circumstances are, we still have to believe we're free. The law of life is a law of freedom. Therefore, I am free. Number 2, and think of Rosa Parks, right? Number 2, so she thinks to herself, I am free. That's a big leap right there. Okay, number 2, images of limitation have no power over me. Images of limitation. This is like the difference between the human law and the greater law by which the cosmos works. Because, Rosa Parks is basically saying, what I'm limited by is human law, this human law which is wrong. I'm going to operate according to a larger law, which I understand, and I am free. Okay, so this image of limitation, that I'm supposed to sit in this seat on the bus, that's just an image of a limitation that is not real. It has no grounding in a deeper reality. And therefore, I'm not going to get up and relinquish this seat, right? The number 3 for the law of change is, and this is a hard one for us, I am mentally healthy. I'm not crazy. I am mentally healthy. Period. So here's Rosa Parks, I am mentally healthy, and I'm free. And here's the last one. Therefore, I refuse to engage in things that ought not be. I refuse to engage in things that ought not be. So those are the 4 aspects of the law of change, which Rosa Parks understood those things in that moment. And that's what gave her the sense of personal efficacy. Like, I can do this, and I will do this no matter what the consequences may be. I'm going to take those consequences no matter what they might be. So when she did that, what happened was, and when it slipped out sideways, and Martin Luther King, she got arrested, and it slipped out sideways. Martin Luther King heard about it, and then Martin Luther King, who was sitting around with his friends deciding the strategy and what to do, said, this is what we need to make this thing happen, to catalyze our movement, and we'll bring in the media, we'll do it again, we'll stage it. They did, it worked, and then the civil rights movement just took off and went to another level. But Martin Luther King got most of his information about nonviolent action from Gandhi, who was also the master of media. Gandhi created the principles for nonviolent action that people could operate by, nonviolent resistance. So first he created this, and then he made sure that whenever he did something, he had the media presence, because he knew that you're wasting your time, and it's dangerous not to have the media presence, very dangerous. The media is protection. So Gandhi also knew he was a master of symbolization. So first nonviolent resistance, media presence, but also symbolization. Choose what you're going to do wisely and make sure it has several layers of symbolic power to it, So, for example, he marched across the country with a lot of people all the way to the seashore, where it was forbidden to claim the salt because the salt was owned by salt companies, right? And Gandhi said, no, you're not going to own our salt. This salt belongs to everybody. This is the beach. So, famous picture, all the media there. Gandhi scoops his hand into the salt, holds his hand, of course, so the cameras can get it, and the salt's pouring off his hand. That was the picture seen around the world, and that's all it took. He's picking up the salt. Very simple. He's throwing a British blouse into the flames. Click, 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 Okay, so key, media. Gandhi's actions grew out of his own sense of persecution, but most critically, he was also influenced by Tolstoy. So I wanted to mention that too, because Gandhi's sense of persecution, I think a lot of you know that what happened with Gandhi, and I won't go into the whole story, but basically he was thrown out of a first-class compartment on a train in South Africa for being colored. And, he was a lawyer. He was pretty well known. He was already a lawyer. And he was pretty well known, and he had a first-class ticket. And they said, that doesn't matter. You're black. You're colored. And you can't do that. You can go to the back of the train. And he said, no, I'm not going to the back of the train. Yeah, you're going to go to the back of the train if you're going to stay on the train. No, I'm not going to. So they threw him off the train in a deserted train station that was really, really cold. And I think if I remember the story correctly, his coat was still on the train. And he was freezing. And he was so angry. Oh my gosh. He was just so angry in the dark, freezing cold. And why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? Why me? Why me? Why me? And the result was, aha, this is happening to me. Me, a lawyer. All right, let's go. Let's go for it. And that was exactly when his life changed, the worst moment of his life, and he started this work. Who better than a very trained lawyer to start to address these ideas of racism? He picked up Tolstoy's book, and Tolstoy's book is called The Kingdom of God is Within You. The Kingdom of God is Within You, which Tolstoy could not get published because they thought it was terrible after he'd written War and Peace and all this other stuff. It took him 2 years to find a publisher. They thought he'd lost his mind. And basically what he was saying is we could come to peace, we could be in peace, we could live in peace if we only upheld the tenets of our religion that we're raised within. For example, our religion says, do not kill. Pretty simple. Okay, and Tolstoy came to all his conclusions after being in the Crimean War, which was very violent, and he was in that war. And he came out of that war saying, why are we doing this? We tell our boys year after year after year, our boys are in church and they grow up, we're telling them, thou must not kill, you don't kill. Then, they turn 16 or whatever. We send them into the war and we say, okay, boy, kill, kill, kill. And he says, this creates a massive conflict in the consciousness. If we just stuck with our religion and we said, thou shalt not kill, everything would be okay, and we upheld all those principles. And that's what this book is about. The kingdom of God is within you. So Gandhi picks up the book. He's not even Christian. Tolstoy is Christian. Gandhi picks up the book and he says, finally, when they got the book published, it was written in Russian, and when they finally got the book published and translated into English, Gandhi picked it up in South Africa and he said, yes, 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 yes. The answers are in this book. If we only stuck to the tenets of our religion. So he's thinking Hinduism. He's thinking love. He's thinking the big love, big love, bhakti love. He's thinking, yeah, that's right. We need to stick to the tenets of our religion and we're going to be okay. So what was interesting, part of what's interesting to me is Tolstoy put it in a religious context, not a political context. Gandhi put it in a spiritual context with political ramifications. Martin Luther King put it in a spiritual context with political ramifications, but all these people chose a spiritual context. Fast forward to Riane Eisler, and she too put it in a spiritual context of women's spirituality. So I think it's interesting that all those people chose that. Okay, so where did Tolstoy get his ideas? So he's got all these ideas listed for the paradigm shift into love. Gandhi, paradigm shift into love, nonviolence. Martin Luther King, paradigm shift into love. Riane Eisler, geez, said that wrong 3 times. Riane Eisler, paradigm shift into love. Okay, well actually what's such a kick to me is that Tolstoy got his ideas seeded from the American Quakers. So it was William Penn and the people in Pennsylvania, who were talking about love and how we could create this a world of love if we just shift into a different paradigm and we hold different values dear inside our hearts. So I don't know where it started, but you can trace the lineage starting with William Penn, not just William Penn, but the whole William Penn was writing. A lot of the ideas have changed and shifted since that time, and we wouldn't agree with a lot of the specific ideas, but what we would agree with is the general trend and the general form of the ideas. So I was going to see if William Penn's date is here, if it pops out in this book. No cross, no crown. Okay, I don't see, it's not popping out. But I was also interested in what happened with this lineage is that it started with some of the early people in the United States, then it goes to Russia, then it goes to South Africa, then it goes to India, then it goes back to the United States, just in that particular lineage. So I also think that if you think that you are not impacting anybody, you don't know. Tolstoy felt like nobody could hear him. He couldn't get his stuff published. Nothing was working. Well, it only took one person to pick up his book. It happened to be Gandhi. Same with Gandhi. Gandhi was feeling like, wow, I don't know if I'm being effective. I don't know if I'm doing anything. I'm only doing the best I can, But then fast forward, Martin Luther King, next generation. See, this is several generations. First, we've got the generation of William Penn, then we've got Tolstoy, then we've got Gandhi, then we've got Martin Luther King, then we've got Riane Eisler, for example. I just throw in Riane, but you can see there's a lot of people at the same time as Martin Luther King. He wasn't the only one, but he was very significant. Then Riane Eisler comes along, and 500 books on women's spirituality coming out at the same time, saying, you know what we need? We need a new paradigm. We need to raise up the feminine values because, in fact, all of those people, William Penn, Tolstoy, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, were all talking about feminine values. the values of caring and sharing and being together and linking for power. It's a different type of energy. So that's what they were bringing forward. And I consider myself to be also in this lineage of love, which for me is also a lineage of peace. And now, through the rest of our reading, we're going to start looking at methods of operationalizing love and peace through nonviolent action. And so we're going to start looking at our vows, our codes, and we're going to be looking at the new form of spirituality that condones the partnership model, the collaborative model, and the synergistic values that we are working to bring forward. And then, in this, I just finished this Terra Nova, the land of kindness. Terra Nova is the land of kindness. And the book ends basically with a vow from New Year's Day this year. And this is basically the vow of I vow to strive towards self-liberation, self-expression, individuation, and the continuing remembrance of the divine field, the living divine field that exists within and all around all that is. And I vow to help others strive for this, for self-liberation, self-expression, individuation, and the recognition and celebration of the living divine field that exists within and all around us. And may all beings everywhere be free from suffering. May all beings everywhere be happy. And may I dedicate this life to making it so. And this is where I'll end. Imagining this vow and other things seeding the field that we're living in right now and creating the conditions of the field. And just imagine this kind of work that we're all doing together falling onto the keyboard like poppy seeds. Poppies, and scattering it all across the globe, because we have the power to do that. And not only do we have the power to do that, but we are part of a really strong movement on our planet that is growing. It's a growing movement. And now that we have the ability to communicate with each other instantaneously, we can seed that movement with our symbols and our imaging in any direction we want to take it. And we can take our cues from some of these people who have been so good with the seeding of images into the culture, a single simple image flying into and through our culture. So we can begin to think smartly about that, and then how we are going to work with that and bring the media to it if there is something that we want to work on for change, starting with ourselves, how we're going to change our own consciousness. So I'm going to end there with the idea of symbolization and action in terms of naming and creating symbols as we work with the eighth power. And those symbols are going to come out of whatever it is that arises within us as we seek new information, and that's the 7 energy, the vision quest energy. And whatever arises, we'll package it. We can package it in symbols and lob it out into the field.